Shanti. Okay, so we saw last time change of topic, right? Change of topic is from Brahma Vidya to Yoga Shastra. So that means what is, you need to understand as it is, but in order to understand it as it is, you need preparation, right? So what is the nature of preparation? So we saw the first two verses. The first verse talks about Vyavasayatmika Buddhihi. Okay? Nishchayatmika Buddhihi means what are we trying to do in spiritual pursuit. Okay? So the verse I explained, so I'm not going to re-explain it, but the main point of this verse is...
Sorry, what's the verse again?
Page
1. The first one? The first one? Okay.
No, 41. I'm talking about 41. I'm talking about 41. So Vyavasayatmika Buddhi means Nishchayatmika Buddhi. Nishchayatmika Buddhi is well ascertained understanding of what you are trying to fix. Because unless there is clarity about what you are trying to fix, you will fix it at the wrong place, right? So therefore, the example, we saw a lot of logic, but I wasn't sure if people were understanding or not. So at the end of the class, I showed Shona some example, and I think she said, oh, that is very clear. So I'm going to try to use that example, right? So now here, for example, this cushion is what color? Orange or red or whatever, orange, right? Now, because of some defect in your eyes, you don't see this orange color, right? So now, where is the effort that you need to make?
In your eyes.
In your eyes, right? Because imagine, because of the defect, you don't see it as orange and you try to make it orange. You assume that this is not orange and you try to make this orange. Are you at the right? Because where are you manipulating?
With your eyes.
No.
With the object instead of yourself.
Exactly. Right? The problem is where? In your eyes. But because your eyes cannot see clearly, you don't see this clearly and you are constantly trying to fix this. Is this the right place of fixing? Exactly. Actually, this doesn't need fixing at all. It's already orange. Where is the place where you have to work? Your vision. Right? So now, this is the problem. The entire spiritual pursuit for everybody else is trying to fix the I, the nature of I. Where actually what is Vedanta saying? I is free. Absolutely. It is Brahman, it is free. Right? Any practice, any spiritual practice that you do by saying that Atma, I am going to cleanse it up, the energy, for example. I am going to clean the energy. What is the assumption behind that?
Yeah, it's erroneous because it is already clean and it is already pure.
Excellent. Right? So that means, or to say that I am going to clean my aura. So the point is, what are you trying to do? You feel that I is dirty and you have to clean it up. Right? Now, Vyavasayatmika Buddhi is exactly as Tushna is saying, actually where the problem is not this is already free. As Soloni says, Atma is already Brahman. You don't need to fix Atma. Okay? But if you don't need to fix Atma, still some fixing is required. But where is the locus of that fixing? Not here, but where? If you don't see this orange as orange, where do you need to fix?
Your vision, your perception.
Exactly. So there is some fixing, but the locus of that fixing is your eyes and not here. This is the mistake that everybody makes. They actually assume that eye is afflicted and they try to what? Free the eye, when actually what Vedanta says is eye is already free. What you need to fix is your vision, which does not enable you to see the real color of this. In this case, the real color of this cushion, which is already there. Do you understand that? So the whole pursuit becomes, what is it? Making yourself prepared for understanding the reality of Atma rather than fixing the Atma itself. Because Atma is already all that you want it to be.
We have to prepare ourselves
To understand and live the vision of that freedom which I already am, rather than fixing the I. As long as you don't understand where the locus of the problem is, you are confused about that, the very whole pursuit, you can try so hard to make this into orange, and you are working extremely hard, and the real locus is where? Your this eye, the globe, this eye, and that is what you're constantly trying to make this something which it already is, and you're not fixing the eye, and it will always appear to be something different than what it is.
Does that also work for a human? Like you're giving an example of an object right now, but does that also work where how we look at people sometimes?
Yeah, exactly.
Like,
Absolutely. Because absolutely. See, the thing is,
so how would you
because
put that example in?
exactly the same. It's exactly the same, that you see the behavior. See, every time whoever behaves in whatever way, that may be some partial truth in that, right? But a lot of it is the story and the meaning that you give to what that person is doing, right? So all your understanding and your all responses are based on what you understand. Partly it could correspond to what the other person is doing, but a large part is what you understand the person is doing, and you are so convinced that that person is like that. So you are trying to fix that person. But where is it that you need to fix?
Your reaction to the
Yeah, and your own understanding of that person.
And accept the person.
So in fact, first, before accepting, because you can tell, see, we get into Vedanta is a very subtle thing, right? You can say, this person is mean and let me accept that person. But that person is mean is your conclusion, may not be totally true. So you always get into this, this holier than thy attitude, and then you said, I have to be forgiving, I have to be accepting. But what I'm trying to say is something totally different. What I'm trying to say is, before you conclude that that person is like that, there may be some truth, right? But a lot of it is also what you add your own perception, and you begin to believe that your story is right. So you also then begin to what? The clarity lies in, you need to
take the veil.
you question exactly your own perception and see that it could be wrong, right? So that means we are constantly trying to fix the world, because we think that if this is not according to how I want it to be, that needs fixing. But a lot of time our own perception needs fixing, and we never pay attention to that. So that means we are trying to fix at a wrong locus. And as long as you are trying to fix at the wrong place, the problem never gets solved. Right? So even if you want to see, this is major difference between all the other spiritual pursuit and Vedanta. You must understand. These are very fundamental conceptual things. If you don't understand that, spirituality doesn't mean anything, because you'll just gather information and there is no basic clarity.
What if that person really is mean?
That person is mean, maybe, it's true, that is a possibility. Then you have a choice. how much you want to interact with that person, how much you want to, then you need to adjust your living, but that choice you always have. Nobody can say that choice is not there, right? So if you really feel, rather than saying that person is mean, you can say that you don't get along, or then you choose not to be with that person because it's not something which is enhancing for yourself. So then you can always make a choice to be away. And away in many different creative ways. Right? And that you must do. Because if you don't do that, then when there is a choice, you don't exercise that choice and you get into this helpless situation, which is your self-created situation. Because when you have a free will and you don't use it and then you tell yourself, I'm helpless, you're caught in your own paradigm, which is not corresponding to the truth.
And that is why also just the acceptance, what you were saying, you don't need to accept. You don't need to accept if somebody is really mean. You don't need to accept. I mean, you
absolutely,
recognize them.
Absolutely,
you don't accept them.
Absolutely, right? So a lot of the times, all these messages that they sound very nice. You have to forgive. You have to accept. I never use these words. I don't use these words because they don't help anyone. Who are you to forgive anyone? I mean, that in that whole thing of forgiveness, you have put yourself on some kind of a huge pedestal, and that person is like so mean, but I forgive you. Well, who are you? We create this, the whole picture of the world, which is constantly putting ourselves above everyone else. We're so condescending, right? When I was talking to one woman, and she was saying, yeah, but my husband will never get it. So I said, but if you are telling yourself he'll never get it, what kind of respect do you have for that other person? How you have totally written that person off. And then you're communicating where you're constantly saying, but anyway, whatever I say is never going to change. What? So what kind of confidence you have in the person with whom you are living? Right? So you need to change certain messages, and you can say, yeah, up to now, that person has not changed. True. Because the person may have some other pressures, but you keep trying. That is exactly what. Acceptance, passive acceptance is not what we talk about at all in Vedanta.
That's abuse to yourself.
That is abuse to yourself, absolutely. Right? We constantly talk about being proactive, distinguishing between what you can change and what you cannot change. And what you can change, you have to be proactive, because otherwise you're just giving up when you can be proactive. And then you blame. And then you put yourself in this kind of an impasse which doesn't exist in life. Situation of impasse. Life moves. There's a constant change. And with that change you also have what? Capacity to make decisions, and you have to be very intelligent in making those decisions. Right? So therefore, this is something which you must understand, that the basic difference between Vedanta and any other pursuit is, in any other pursuit is, Atma needs fixing. Right now, you are incomplete and you have to do something to make yourself complete. In Vedanta, what is the premise? You're already free, but you don't see yourself as free. So therefore, what requires fixing? There is some fixing. Exactly. So that means you need to keep on working on your perception.
That's just questioning it.
Exactly. Questioning it and correcting it. Questioning it and correcting it. Okay. Once that is clear.
Those lines Vedanta says what you just
Okay, now somebody else says, because I want you all to understand this, because it's very, very, very critical. I don't want to keep on repeating, because then it becomes, I want you all to think about it and get it, because it's if you don't get this, you'll listen to Vedanta for years and you'll not know what is going on.
And you act from.
Exactly.
Basically, in other you say that you need to correct your Atma, that's the beginning point. But where Vedanta is concerned, that premise itself is wrong. Because you are already free, your Atma is already cleansed and perfect in that sense. But it's your perception which is not able to see it. So you need to prepare yourself to accurately see this vision of freedom and actually live it out. Because you're already actually perfect. What you need to do is change your perception, your mind, your senses, everything to absorb this perfect vision that you already are and live it.
That is true. So that means, now, when I say Atma, so generally we think that our Atma is where? In the mind. So then you think that, therefore are we saying that the mind is perfect? When I say Atma is already free, am I saying the mind is perfect? No. Right? So that means what requires fixing? The mind. Because the mind has created this huge big mess where it is making you feel helpless, making you feel sad, making you feel angry, making you feel kind of highly limited. So that means you need to work on that mind and free it from all these perceptions. Based on what? Re-understanding the realities of your existence. So that is what Karma Yoga is. You're not fixing Atma. What are you fixing? Your mind. Understand?
So you are fixing the mind to finally align with the
Excellent. You're fixing the mind to finally align with Atma. Absolutely.
Because the Atma is already free and pure, you don't need to do anything.
Excellent.
You only align with it.
Excellent. Because if that is not clear, you constantly try to manipulate Atma. You are doing it at a wrong place. You see that? This is this is the difference between Vedanta and any other pursuit. Where it's very rightly Mitali says, the starting point of any other pursuit is Atma needs fixing, I needs fixing. Okay, Atma is free. It is that invariable presence because of which you come to know different thoughts which are going on in your mind. But your thoughts are so distorted and the thought patterns have become so well entrenched that they take over your being. So you need to undo those thought patterns.
But what about your perception in a physical situation? Forget this meanness or physical. Like, I am asthmatic. I don't want to be asthmatic, but I am asthmatic. So I do need to fix that part
Of course, but where is the locus? What are you fixing? Are you fixing Atma or are you fixing the body?
I am fixing the body.
Perfect.
But
Exactly.
the Atma is affected by that limitation.
That is your
in the body.
conclusion.
But
So
that is the erroneous conclusion.
Vision.
It is not affected by the asthma. You think it is affected.
Okay, so fine.
So that means, 1 minute. So the problem lies at the locus of this problem of, let's say, asthma or any other problem, right, is the body. And then as a result of what is going on in the body, the mind constantly interprets what is going on in the body. So where are the locus of the problem? The body and the mind, right? Because there is one physical condition, but based on that physical condition, if I begin to be irritated or if I begin to be intolerant or if I get into self-pity mode, these are all what?
Or is it the other way around? Your mind is affected, so it's affecting your body.
Both. It actually can both. So a lot of things are psychosomatic too, because what happens is, this is a very good point, that sometimes actually, let's say you have a problem and your incapacity to deal with that problem, right, makes you fear that problem, and it then starts manifesting as physical ailment, right?
No, but
So
I'm
therefore,
asking the question in a different way. I'm not talking about mind distortions. Like you said, I think this person is mean to me. So one is I have to say that, see her actions in the context in which she's making them. Maybe she doesn't mean to be mean and it's my interpretation. That's one. Second is I say she is mean. I remove myself from her in creative ways, maybe not physically or whatever, remove myself from reacting to her, etc. How do you do that with a physical thing? If I have cancer or I have asthma,
You need
how
to
do
fix
I
it.
reinterpret? I don't think that somebody is making me a victim of asthma. It is true that I can't.
So this is why. See, it's very easy. Saloni, it's very easy. So when you have a car and it's not working well, right? It's not I, but it needs fixing. And you'll do everything. You'll take it to a garage mechanic and you will fix it, right? Because it's not I doesn't mean you don't fix it.
Yeah.
But you're not confused that the car is not well, so therefore I'm not well.
Okay.
Yeah? So and you will do everything you can to fix it, right? Because you need to fix it. And whatever means you have, whether you have Ayurveda or you have homeopathy or you have whatever it is, you'll use whatever you can to fix the thing, right? But the thing is, the whole point of Vedanta is the locus of this is body, and what is the nature of I?
The limitless.
Exactly. The invariable presence because of which you see the changing condition of your body. So that is, once you know that, then it's okay. The body needs fixing, you'll fix it. It's not like, oh, I will not fix it. You will fix it. But you will not impute it at the wrong place. Yes?
Yeah, and in fact, if we apply what you're saying, right, about altering the vision to further align ourselves with this thought, okay, enhance. Part of fixing also the body will be a lot of understanding of your relationship with the illness. Maybe altering that to make it better, to heal it better. For example, now they say like cancer, for example, they say is very much based in your, in your emotional systems because they are like so imbalanced and it's autoimmune. Then you get it's an autoimmune disorder. So it's totally out of whack, and which is why most people will go for the physical treatment, but will totally ignore that there is this component. So again, that's about expanding, I guess. If not expanding, at least altering. You don't want to say
Exactly.
you had a narrow vision before, right?
But a lot of illnesses are genetics also. So,
but if you
Yeah, but
then
see
limit
here-
it, if you take a limited understanding, who's to say that you can't, even if it's genetic, the healing process cannot be enhanced by your understanding and sort of the way you deal with it also translates into how your cells finally will deal with it, right? If you remain angry and upset and say, oh, I'm helpless and it's genetic, then what do you do? Then you're stuck, right?
But
You cannot also
But I was sort of solution because if you have an illness like that, which yes, it is your body, it is not you as well. But it will affect the way you think, the way you feel, the way you act.
I'm not even talking about that. I'm talking about physical.
And let's move because
You as a person, I mean, I don't know.
see this is where Mitali, I was telling you all, Vedanta is not meant to fix your you want to fix your physical thing, you have to better go to the doctor. You can't come to Vedanta to get rid of your disease, please. So you see what I mean? So whatever you need to take care of things.
It's just
Right?
you have a situation, you take care of it.
Absolutely, you take care of it.
So fine, I've asked the question.
Yeah, so it's you can't come to say, okay, now I've come to Vedanta, so now fix my physical problems, fix my relational problems, fix everything, because otherwise I have not come to do that. So this is where I say I explained, right? I have explained very well. If you can recall what I'm talking about, right? How does it work? There is one part of your brain which is instinctual brain, right? Which is working on instinct. You're feeling, there is pain, physical pain, and you'll feel bad. This is how it is programmed. That's biology. You can't interfere because it's a whole mechanism with that. Because you're not feeling well, you'll try to correct it. If you were not feeling well, you will not even try to correct it. That's a natural design. Vedanta does not interfere with natural design. But what happens is, when your cortex is not well developed, you behave only based on your instincts. You're not feeling well, you are depressed, then again as you continue this whole process, that will make you sicker, and then you feel worse, and then you're caught in this circle. What does Vedanta do? Does it eliminate these centers of your brain which will give you this stimuli? No. What will it do? It will develop your cortex, which will enable you to understand life in so much bigger context, in light of which this needs to be fixed, but how you won't make it what?
Take over your whole life.
Exactly. It will not take over your whole life, because right now every little problem that we have, it takes over our whole life. Our whole mental time, 80% of our mental time is occupied with one person with whom I think I don't get along. If 80% of your mental time is constantly occupied with that, how are you using your brain?
Very poorly.
Very poorly. So it gives you that infrastructure, and if you try to give it 5%, the 80% which was previously occupied with this worry, it's all empty. If it is empty, there is a void. I'm trying to fill it up with wisdom, so that everything that happens in your life, you gain a certain perspective and you're able to handle it. Handle it most intelligent manner, without being overwhelmed by it, and it occupying your whole time, mental, physical and emotional time. I'm not here to fix all your lives. Please don't impute. Vedanta is not meant for that.
We have to fix it up.
You have to
understand.
exactly, right? You have to fix your own life based on what you study here and apply it rightly. If the impact of those emotions are so forceful that you can't bring in this understanding, then you have to spend time with those emotions and release those emotions, because they have piled up for years without being recognized. You need to spend time with yourself. Right? Because unless you undo that, Vedanta will not help you. Vedanta can only give you a perspective in light of which you help yourself to get rid of years and years of baggage that has been sitting there unaddressed. Right? So therefore, that impact is going to remain, and it's not going to go away immediately. But that burden of that impact, you have to take time with yourself to deal with it, right? So therefore, one thing is, so that means that the mind is giving messages. Situations can be difficult. True. Nobody can deny that situations are all very easy. But your incapacity to deal with those situations creates baggage that you have to understand. Okay? Sadness, if a situation, external situation has produced sadness, you will cry. What is the big deal? What is the big deal? But your inability to cry it out and say, what? I have to be this perfect person, is all your messages. And the minute you try to put up a front which is not in keeping with how you're really feeling, what happens? You have moved you've removed yourself from reality. When you have removed yourself from reality, the distortions happen. Exactly. And then how does that anger, that sadness which has not been grieved for, it can manifest as physical ailments, it can turn into anger towards somebody else, it can turn into anger towards the world. All undealt emotions.
May I share a thing? When last week in our school, a teacher lost her 21-year-old son, only child. And a friend of mine was very close to her, was saying, how could I offer her comfort? Such terrible pain and all that. And I thought I'll ask you this question. And then when I was coming up in the lift, I thought that, I wonder, of course you can't offer comfort in that, but if I asked her this question, or somebody asked her this question, that, okay, if you knew that you would only have this child for 21 years, would you not have him? Or would you focus on all the joy that he brought you for those 21 years? And I guess somehow in that dark mire of such intense pain, there is always one small point of light
Absolutely.
that can offer something. And I think that is what Vedanta also tells you about moving, right? It will lessen your pain or lessen your loss or anything, but at least it will give some.
See, what Vedanta says is, situations like that will produce sorrow. You can't but feel sad, right? You can't. What generally happens is we try to resist feeling it, right? Or we get totally depressed and we can't come out of it. So there are two kind of a thing. Either we are so deep into sorrow and we just cannot get ourselves out of it, or we deny. We are into that denial. Okay? As I told you, I think I told you this story where same thing, right? In a family, a 21-year-old son, 19-year-old son died. Okay, and there were other kids in the family, so the parents decided not to talk about it. When you try not to talk about such a huge event, in this whole false this thing of harmony and protection, you are removing yourself from reality. So that means any event requires a corresponding emotion. You need to grieve. In fact, modern psychologists say that there is a healthy period of grieving, which is what? Any major loss. It takes 6 months to recover. You can't resist that. During these 6 months, whenever you feel like crying, you have to cry it out. Because otherwise, this is your instinctive brain, right? It is giving you signals and you're trying to resist that. It'll never work. You have to cry it out. There is no other way. That is process of healing. Right? But now after 6 months, if I'm constantly in the same, I keep telling myself a story, I'm so, I feel like a victim, and I keep on increasing that story again and I can't get out, I can't move. That one event is going to decide how I'm going to feel for rest of my life, what I'm going to do for rest of my life. Then what is it?
It's a distortion.
It's a distortion. Right? So therefore, what Vedanta says is, neither you can tell yourself not to grieve, because that is something which is required. It is sanity. Resistance is going to lead to distortions, major distortions. Right? But after having grieved, you have to equip your cortex with a larger picture, in light of which those events are put in perspective, and your whole life is not going to get defined by that one event. That you have to do. So neither you are resisting your instinctual brain, nor you are only operating from it. This is what Vedanta does. That is intelligent living. Any spiritual attempt to deny emotions, to avoid emotions, to eliminate emotions will not work, because they are part of your what?
Your system.
Yeah, they are part of your system. We don't even understand that, and we try to eliminate it. It's not possible. So this is why what we say is that there's a lot of sanity in Vedanta. That's why I say there is no advice. You just have to help yourself by knowing what you can do and what you can't do. Just that intelligent navigation, that's all you need. Okay? And in the short run, when you feel that you have changed, so in the short run everything else is going to change, that may not be a reasonable expectation. So that's why I loved Chandana's story. It was a beautiful story because it really said in a story form exactly the idea that I wanted to convey. Exactly. It was a beautiful story. To the point, very, very analytical, and just clarity. There was nothing but clarity there. Right? Because the next verse, I'm going to move on, but that Vyavasayatmika Buddhi, I'm talking at a different level, you're taking at a different level, but it's okay. In any problem solution, what? The locus has to be correct. If you try to solve the problem at a wrong place, it's never going to get solved. That much you have to understand. Right? Now, the second thing is, now if my mind needs working and if I need to get rid of my distortions, which is not enabling me to enjoy the freedom that I am, so where do I start? Working on my mind. Where do I start? So the first thing, the starting point is to recognize what I can change and what I cannot change.
Your action with an understanding of the laws and do your action to get your result without thinking that you are in control of that result.
Excellent, excellent. This is perfect, right? So that means the verse, which is 47, it talks about a statement of fact. The statement of fact is you have a choice over your actions, but you don't have a choice over your result. This is a fact.
That you don't have a choice over
Result.
result.
Because
I am the author with reference to my action, never with reference to the result.
this is karmani eva adhikaraha te. With reference to karma, you have a choice. This is written. This is the verse. Right? Ma phaleshu kadachana. Right? The result is something that you don't have in your hand. All our actions that we do, we haven't even understood, because we have obsession with what? The results, controlling the results. And if the results don't happen according to our wishes, what happens? We get upset, we get frustrated, we call ourselves victim, either or failure. We take on a huge burden because we don't understand these facts. Right? But because the results are not totally in your hand, does it mean that you just have to sit back and not do anything? No. Karmani eva adhikaraha te. Your whole trick about how you are going to act in this world is you have infinite choices with reference to your actions, and you don't use that faculty of choice effectively. We generally, as I told last time, we have created within us a scenario where what? Either I have done something or I what?
I can do or don't do.
Exactly. Right? So either I do something which is like one extreme, or I don't do anything. But in between, I have this whole spectrum which is available to me, which goes totally unexplored. So that's why I put myself in this helpless position and keep on telling myself I'm helpless, and this is not working, he's not changing, and all these different things. I'm giving one message. And then, exactly, and I'm overwhelmed. So that means the skill is that in between, these two situations, either you want to change the person completely or you want to be totally passive and not say anything. We only think in terms of two extremes. Oh, I've stopped. People tell me in my classes, said, oh, before I used to react, now I have stopped saying anything. So we go from exactly. So from one extreme to the other. I'm not giving advice to what? None of the two responses are proper. That is the reality. Either you just go and freak out and say whatever you want and whatever, or you're totally passive and you don't say a word. And you think you're becoming spiritual. You're not becoming spiritual. You're not becoming wiser because you're not dealing with the problem. Where is wisdom?
Wisdom is an alignment to be balanced.
Making a sensible choice.
Exactly. Absolutely. Making a sensible choice, what I should do, in what degree I should do, how I should do it. You can use your creativity. This mind is an amazing mind. You know why kids love all these games? You know why they love games?
Because there's no right and wrong.
They have to find solutions constantly. They navigate. And they have to find, this car, when you're a car that's driving, a huge thing comes. What do you need to do? You need to go there. Right? Then from there it comes. Then you need to. So that means it's a lovely thing. You're constantly alert and you're navigating. And how much? How much do you need to move? How much? Depending upon what object is coming. Right? You can't just every time create a rule, I'm going to move 2 inches away. You will hit. So that means this is where the whole wisdom is lying. We don't exercise that free will appropriately and then we constantly complain. Right? So this is why the example, Chandana, you want to give your example? It was a beautiful example because it exactly, our whole focus becomes, oh, I can't change this, so let me give it up. And that is not how this karmani eva adhikaraste shows us that you can't give up.
I was just telling them in the last class because Nima had given us a similar story about somebody she knew in Dubai, I think. So I shared this experience where, when my second son was born, Jaydeep, he was very sick, a lot of loose motions, a lot of issues. So literally every week we were at the hospital. So I got really obsessed with him and didn't realize that. So Vijit was about 4 or 5 and he went across to our neighbor's house, used to play with them. And she called me and she said that, Chandana, I have to tell you something that Vijit said to me today, that my mama doesn't love me anymore and she only loves my brother and doesn't love me at all, and the whole saga and the story. So it was really upsetting then that he would go and tell this to the neighbor and all that. So me and my husband both spoke about it, and then rather than getting upset, we decided to work on it and made a conscious decision that we can't get so paranoid and we have to give him attention, and without making it very obvious. And I was just telling him, when I look back today, I don't know when the transition happened, how it happened, I have no idea. But today where I am, when I look back, I don't see any of those issues at all. I mean, he got over it and he's even forgotten about it. And if I joke with him sometimes that this happened, I mean, he said, yeah, okay, so.
Exactly. Generally what happens is, I think the last time she said one thing which was very important, that when I think that happened, he was maybe 7, and when he was 8, he was still carrying the burden, right? So now, if you tell yourself that I've tried enough, and now he's not changing, and you label him as he's never going to change now, then what? You stop making effort. So that means our whole thing is controlling result. Our whole orientation is, I want to control, I want to change him because I have changed, I want him to change in 6 months. I want him to change in 1 year. And if he hasn't changed in that 6 months or 1 year, then he's unchangeable. He's like that.
And actually the result didn't come for some time.
Exactly.
He was a very quiet, very introverted child, not wanting to share with his brother. There was that angst. So for some years it actually didn't come.
Absolutely.
And then at some point it came, I don't know when it came, but it has come now.
So exactly. So what happens is, what I want to highlight in this particular scenario is, we haven't understood what we can change and what we cannot change. Our whole focus is, I want this outcome. I want the child to not feel not loved. And I feel that, I have made 2 days effort, so now he should feel good about himself. No, because there are past causes, which are many, which may not enable the child to change in 2 days or 3 days or 6 months or even 1 year. But does it then mean that you have to give up? No. Because where is it that, in fact, instead of putting so much emphasis on controlling the result, where has to be your emphasis? On your efforts. If you change that focus and say, let me find ways to make it happen, and I have this infinite choice. This is the human brain with which I'm gifted. It is creative, it is brilliant. So therefore, you have to keep trying, because that's the only thing you can actually do. You can't do anything else. And when you are actually working towards solution, whether the problem externally gets solved or not, you are in a mindset of what? Creative. Applying yourself. When you are applying yourself and you are constantly looking for solutions, you are not in this helpless mode, and it will solve the problem for you whether the external problem gets solved or not. It will put you in a mindset where it is a proactive mindset. Very, very critical. This is one of the most beautiful verses of Bhagavad Gita. If you can understand the implication of this verse, and if you apply 30% of what it says in your life, I'll tell you, your life will become so much simpler. Because we are constantly wanting to manipulate the result.
When we were holidaying in Sri Lanka,
Yes.
we had a Tai Chi lesson one day.
Okay.
And he taught us showed us one action.
Yes.
He said, he called somebody and he said, hold my hand very, very tight, as tight as you can. And don't try to pull it. So he said, the trick to educate yourself is to resist immediately. Let him feel you a little, then his grip will become a little loosened, then you can pull it. And he did that 2-3 times.
Basically, he was just saying, if someone is hard, you have to be soft.
Yeah, yes.
Someone is soft.
Yes.
It's a work in progress of hard and soft. You don't be hard and hard together like a clash.
Yes.
Exactly.
So you have to know, like
You need-
to know in which situation, how, what degree.
Exactly.
Yes.
Absolutely. What you say, how you say, that is your creativity. Not, okay, now either I was violent, then I've become totally passive. That's not spirituality.
So navigation with awareness.
Exactly. Intelligent navigation with awareness. And constantly, you keep yourself engaged. Think about life as, this constantly situations present, and they test your wisdom.
Most often in any situation, if you take a pause and breath, you get a lot of different answers.
Exactly.
As opposed to just the one.
Exactly.
That is where
You have lots and lots and lots of different options. But you have created a mindset where there are no options, two extreme options. You have to free yourself from that and let all these, and then you begin to see how much this 3 pound of brain that you have been endowed with, how much it is capable of doing, and how totally you underutilize it. Okay, and you don't even equip it with some proper understanding. It just does whatever. Okay, so therefore, and constantly trying to control others. This control is a huge issue. Huge issue. The closer I am to people, I want to control everyone. I want everybody to be exactly as I want them to be. Which day you will accomplish that? Tell me. Everybody will do exactly as you want. Your kids will do exactly as, whenever you want them to study, they'll study like this thing. Whenever you want them to play, they'll play. Whenever you want them to sleep, they'll just immediately go to sleep. You will make them into some total mediocre, non-thinking human being who's totally incapable of making any decision for themselves. And for you, that is a perfect child, because he's doing everything that you want them to do. You haven't understood anything about child or a human being.
And yet there has to be a balance.
And yet that has to be a balance. Exactly. So that means that control is an issue. So either you exactly, right? So then you said, okay, now I've learnt in Vedanta class I should not control, so I'll leave them to do whatever they want. No. So this is our mind which creates. The only thing that I'm talking about is what? That over control will make your child what? Mediocre. This is a fact. Because the child has not been given enough capacity to explore. And even to deal with failures, because every human being has to deal with failures. And if you totally protect your child to deal with the failures, how will the child learn?
Yeah, Einstein said, if you've never failed, then you haven't lived at all or something.
Exactly.
I mean, totally the wrong person.
You're handicapped. Absolutely. Right? To deal with emotions, to deal with disappointment. I do this class with Manisha and for kids, and I told them once, because I was telling them a story of Steve Jobs, right? So why he was meditating. So in that story, then I was talking about how his company was going public, and there were all these investors who wanted to, put a lot of money into buying stocks of Apple. And just before this event, which is a huge event, he was missing. They didn't know where he was, and then he was found in one corner meditating. So then I made the children think. I said, why would anybody meditate? Right? So in that exploration, it's a lovely class because we explore things together. So I don't tell them, oh, you should meditate. They will all go to sleep. Yeah. So then I told them, you know what, so now imagine, so I said, now let's explore why he would want to meditate. So then somebody said, oh yeah, because he wanted peace. So I said, yeah, why do you think he needed peace? So he says that when you have to go and speak to a huge crowd like this, and if you're all nervous, will you be able to perform well? And how you speak is going to determine what, how much money, how many stocks people are going to buy. So you have to be what? Clear, calm, peaceful. But how do you feel? Nervous. You feel nervous, but you actually, that is detrimental to your performance. So you need to find calmness. Where do you find that calmness? When you meditate. Then I made them think. I said, when you go and speak, now forget about Steve Jobs. When you have to give a presentation in your class and there are 38 students, I said, how many students are there in your class? I said, 38 students. I said, okay. Now, when you have to go and speak in front of those 38 students, how do you feel? Then forget about Steve Jobs. They said, what do you think was their answer?
Excited, nervous, scared.
Scared, nervous. And then somebody said, I have panic attacks. I feel what? That my other students will laugh at me. I said, with all these feelings, when you go and present, do you think you'll be able to do a good job? Because you are carrying these feelings, they are not verbalized, but you are carrying this feeling and you are doing it. Do you think you'll do a good job? So they said, no. So I said, how do you have to be? Then you have to be calm. Only then you'll do a good job. I said, okay, so how have you learned, how was he calm? By meditation. At the end of the class, they said, how many times should we meditate? I didn't tell them to meditate at all. I didn't sit and say, oh, Rama was meditating and Krishna was meditating. This what? It is totally irrelevant. They asked me. Because why? They want to find themselves free from anxiety, nervousness, and they have all felt that. They know it, what it is to feel like that.
Telling your story.
So therefore, this is how you begin to influence the thinking of people. You don't give advices. You don't say, oh, every day 15 minutes you have to sit. You close your eyes and sit in meditation. What will they do? Open the eyes, look at each other, laugh, giggle. Right? You have to make them see things. The teacher's job is to make them see. Then they want it. So as a parent, it's extremely critical how you engage the people. We all are in this kind of all-knowing authoritarian mode, which is a completely dysfunctional mode. Constantly telling them what to do. We don't engage with them in making them see certain things. And it was amazing because in the last class, actually I was prompting them and they were actually verbalizing it. It was amazing how, because I asked them, when do you feel sad? So they said, when we have to do homework, we feel sad. So I said, oh, you feel sad when you have to do homework? So what do you tell yourself? They said, yeah, because when I'm playing, I feel really happy. Now when I'm studying, I feel sad. So I said, imagine that you're constantly telling yourself that you are sad, this is boring, this is, you live your whole life just playing sports. Will you be happy? Then they themselves were thinking. Then one of, I think Mitali's son said, oh no, because then my brain will not be developed, I'll be dumb. So I said, would you like to be dumb? They said, no. So I said, you don't want to be dumb, just playing whole day. You want to be smart, then what? They said, yeah, then I have to spend time and I did not tell myself that I'm sad when I'm studying. You make them discover. You don't give them lectures. You have to sit and study. And you don't have to give them lectures that, oh, if you don't study, then you will not get good jobs. You don't have to go give them a whole big lecture about their whole life, how it is going to end up if they don't study this time. The child has to discover things themselves. It becomes their value. Okay, so that is how even we are all children. We don't know exactly. We are trying to live life. We haven't even understood what I can change and what I cannot change, and I'm just dabbling in darkness. Okay, so therefore that choice with reference to action, you have to use it wisely. The next verse is, and let the results be unfolded by the laws, and work with those laws. Now the next question is, if I have a choice over actions, how should I use this faculty of choice?
This is verse 48.
This is verse, yes, this is verse 48.
If I have a choice,
Okay, no, that is, sorry, in fact 50 is, I want to do 50 first and I'll come back to 48, right? Which is a very nice, because the faculty of choice you have to use effectively. So let's do 50 first and then I'll come back to 48. We'll chant. Buddhi yukto jahatiha ubhe sukruta dushkrute tasmat yogaya yujjasva yoga karma sukaushalam. So chant after me. Buddhi yukto jahatiha ubhe sukruta dushkrute tasmat yogaya yujjasva yoga karma sukaushalam. Okay, this is a very big verse which we then need to spend a lot of time, because the faculty of choice that you have, I can always keep on telling you, use it wisely, use it wisely, use it wisely, and be subtle and be nuanced. But what does it really mean? Right? So therefore, there is a framework that is given which talks about these things you must do, right? In order to grow as an individual, use your faculty of choice appropriately. The first thing that Vedanta Shastra and Bhagavad Gita talks about, yoga karma sukaushalam. Using that discretion in karma is yoga, karma yoga. The first thing is what we call samanya dharma. What is samanya dharma? Whenever you make any choice, make sure that it is in line. I think a lot of people have been talking about alignment, so it is in line with dharma. What is dharma? Dharma in English,
right action.
exactly. Dharma in English is generally translated as ethics.
Isn't dharma that without which, with the essence of something, without which that you will not be wanting in a very broad sense?
Yeah. Dharma is more in a sense of the conduct. My conduct has to be in keeping with what is appropriate. Okay? So therefore, what is appropriate? How do I know that what is appropriate? Right? This is where if you go and study ethics in, let's say, at Oxford or at Harvard or Columbia or wherever, right? So Western ethics, where does it, what is the origin of ethics? This is the big question.
Machiavelli. Hobbes, Machiavelli.
There are all these different theories, right? So there are some schools which think that ethics is something which is a social construct. So we human beings, we have decided that we have to live in harmony and peace. So it's a social contract, and said, okay, now you don't do this to me and I will not do that to you. So this is how we have learned. We've created societies with rules, and when we follow rules, then what? You are ethical, and when you transgress those rules, then you are unethical, because there is this kind of an implicit social contract and you are going against that social contract. right? But according to the vision of Vedanta, it is not just a contract which is based on negotiation and convenience. It is something which is based on how the human brain is designed. It's part of the human brain. Okay? Every human being knows, I don't want to be hurt, I don't want to be cheated, I don't want to be lied to. Whether this child is in Africa, or the child is in America, or in Bombay, or in Australia, or in Fiji Islands, every child knows, I don't want to be hurt, and every child also knows what? Others don't want to be hurt. That's why when a child has hurt somebody, what will the child do? Try to hide that fact from you so that the child is not reprimanded. Right? So therefore, this is something that every child is born with. So therefore, you call it universal ethical values. And that what Vedanta has been saying for a very long time, that the source is not just a human arrangement, but it is what? It is something which is instinctive. It is part of the human brain design, is something which is now verified by neurosciences. They talk about mirror neurons. Now, what is the mechanism through which I come to know that others also don't like what I don't like?
By seeing someone's reaction, you do that.
So that means what the neuroscientists talk about mirror neurons, which says that when the child is in pain, there is a physical signal going, right, from that center of pain to the brain and giving these signals of pain, because of which the child recognizes pain, right? But let's say if your body is in pain, there is no physical signal going from your cells to the brain, but the brain is able to recognize the pain in somebody else. This is what we call mirror neurons. The neurons, without that message going through your own body, can pick up the pain of somebody else because they are able to mirror it. So that means your pain becomes what? Child's pain. So this is how every child understands that if I hurt somebody and I don't like it, if I hurt somebody else, that person is equally not going to like it. So if that is the case, that means what is a norm? What is a norm? Every human being comes with this brain which is programmed in this way. So what is a norm? Exactly. To behave like that is the norm, because you are programmed to be like that. Behave in a way, excellent Saloni, you behave in a way which is honoring that program. That means what? You will not lie, you will not cheat, you will not hurt. But what happens, is there any human being who can really claim that I have never lied, that I have never cheated, I have never hurt anybody? There is no human being. Even Gandhiji, who wrote this whole autobiography about, my experiments with truth, and his commitment to truth was very, very high. Still he talks about as a child how he did everybody. There is no human being which. So that means what is happening? There is a natural program, and we all act against that natural program. Why do we do it?
Perhaps to see the extent, or perhaps because
We have no desire. No.
We justify our actions.
I don't agree that we are novice. I think we do it because it is distorted. Because if I hit somebody, but I feel a lot of power from that, then I think that hitting somebody is good. So I think the experiences
So that
distorted, and therefore we feel
so that means it tantamounts to having no wisdom, right? Because I'm not able to.
Is there. The wisdom is there.
So
It's
wisdom,
just
the
that
knowledge
you
is
know
there.
that somebody else doesn't want to have that feeling, or you don't want to have that feeling. That wisdom is established.
So-
but
Absolutely. So that means there is a knowledge that that person is going to feel. That is perfect example. What Tushna is saying is very true. When the child hits somebody else, the knowledge is very much there that if I hit somebody, that person is going to be hurt and that is not nice, right? But along with it, what she's saying is there is another input which the child gives, that if I hit, right, and the child falls down, I would feel what? Powerful. This is another message that the child gives. And everybody wants to be what? Powerful. So that means through I have two as though conflicting things. One is I want to be powerful. The other one is what? I know I should not hurt. But when I feel that my power comes by hurting somebody, then there is a confusion in the brain. What will win? What will win?
what I believe will give me the outcome.
Exactly. Right? So that means my feeling of wanting to feel powerful is so important to me, then what will I do?
Continue being aggressive.
Exactly. Right? But if I understand that if I shift, this is what wisdom that Saloni is talking about. As long as my focus is on my power and wanting more and more and more, then what will I do? I will not hesitate to hurt people, because even though I recognize that nobody likes to be hurt, what is the criteria for my decision making? My power and not hurting others. I recognize that I'm hurting others. That knowledge is there. But I don't act honoring that knowledge, because for me there is an overriding goal, which is what? My power. So that means nobody does things and nobody can claim that I'm totally ignorant. We do it knowing it, but it is not as important. Okay. So therefore, if I want to change your behavior, if I want to change child's behavior, and I keep telling him, you should not hurt him, you should not hurt him, you should not hurt him, it's bad. But the child knows it. It's not that the child doesn't know it, he knows it. He or she. If you want to make him or her change the behavior, what would you do? Tell me. Wonderful. What else? Wonderful. Can you expand on that?
So obviously he's acting from some sort of distortion, clearly. And if you remove that distortion, then you would not want to feel powerful.
Excellent.
Or feel the power in a different way.
Excellent.
Feel it
Right?
by answering in class or
Excellent. So that means one thing, excellent, right? Feeling powerful itself is nothing wrong. You can't say, everybody wants to be powerful in some way or the other. But you can show, as Saloni says, what more constructive ways of feeling powerful, because that is a need. You can't deny that need.
With the attention that also that one seeks.
Exactly. So that means that the need to be powerful, if I can channel it in a right direction, right? So where I feel powerful by answering, there are wonderful examples, right? Answering a question in the class or solving a puzzle or doing something good, I feel powerful. Then what? That need to be powerful is guarded. You're not given the message, oh, power is not good, or we keep on giving all these value messages which are not in keeping with truth. Okay, but I can channel it wisely, and if I can show very nicely, as Manisha is saying, that if I begin to think that my power comes from inflicting on others, then there is a distortion. If there is a distortion, then how can I undo that distortion? Wonderful. I need to work on not keeping on telling him not to hurt, but to work on what? Undoing that person's distortion.
So it's not to change the need, but to change the way of fulfilling them.
Excellent. Right? The need is a legitimate need. You have to find a legitimate way of fulfilling that need, but at the same time you also then need to work on the distortion. Both. You need to do both. Right? How would you work on distortion? What would you tell your child? Manisha, tell me, how would you even make the child recognize that it's a distortion?
Would you like to be hit?
Excellent. Right? Because the child has mirror neurons. So act intelligently. Would you like to be hit? Right? You are asking the child to put what? Himself in that person's position.
Very often also the question is, how does it feel after you're hit?
Excellent. Excellent. So these are all the different methods. This is engagement. This is what we call engagement with human beings. Right? Even after you have done that, how do you feel? This is a key. First is, would you like to be, recipient of that? The child will say no. But more than that, how would you feel after you have done that? You want to feel what? Powerful. How do you feel? Terrible.
No, you might feel powerful.
A little bit may be powerful, but what may happen is, this is again, you have to see how the universe is, right? The minute you go against the natural program, it creates guilt. There is no human being who can avoid it. This is why a child, right, after hurting somebody, if they know that the parent is coming, if they had no recognition that they had done something wrong, they'll not try to hide it. The very fact that they try to hide it means they know it, that they have done something wrong. So that means the nature gives them a feedback, which is what? In form of guilt. So that means it's a most powerful thing. This is how you begin to listen to the nature and align yourself to that nature, which is what we call Ishvara, because nature is not mechanical dumb thing, it is the intelligence. That we will see later, right? So therefore, make the child understand, make the child see the fact that actually he is doing it for power, and he may still have that sense of power, but along with that sense of power will come guilt. Right? Because it is unavoidable. Only guilt will come.
No, there will be other things.
There will be, what would be the other things?
There will be anger.
Excellent. Along with guilt, fear, right? Fear means, what if my mom finds out that I've hurt this child? Then what? Guilt is compounded with what? Fear. Anxiety. Then remorse, right? So that means now child is feeling little sense of power, but along with it, it has accumulated all these heaviness. Guilt, fear, anxiety, remorse. Then what happens is, when the child keeps on doing it, right? Now he is bullied somebody who's less powerful, but there is always a possibility that somebody is more powerful than him or her, what will happen? According to the child, if I can bully somebody who's less powerful than me, then somebody else who's more powerful can bully me. So this is what we call, our whole mind begins to keep on adding distortions. The minute you go against one universal value, it's not just one distortion, there are multiple distortions. And as you live life, they get compounded.
You also show them the way
So therefore,
contrast helps quite a lot.
contrast helps a lot. Because what the child wants to feel is powerful, and because of his need to feel powerful, he has sacrificed on that universal value of not hurting the other. But in that sacrifice, he thinks that he is a gainer. But if you show the equation totally differently and say it now, in that illusion of power, what else has he gained?
Heaviness, sadness, pain.
Exactly. If you make the child present this picture to the child, what will the child choose? Always the other side. Yeah, because the child wants to act in one's own interest. You don't need to keep on telling, hey, don't hurt, don't hurt. The child knows it.
But that's exactly what's in my mind, is that just like all these values of feeling good and not hurting someone, is there, one universal value is to act in self-interest always. So that kind of is clashing with all the other values.
No, exactly. See, this is what we think it is clashing. So that's why people make that decision, because absolutely what Nandini is saying is right. The child thinks that I'm acting in self-interest because I want power. So if by hurting somebody, I'm going to feel the sense of power, then I'm acting in my self-interest, right? And I'm ignoring the universal values. This is what everybody does. Most of the time people do.
Every action of ours, if you think about
So,
every day, every action stems from self-interest.
Absolutely. There is no problem with that. Now, so if I want to change that behavior where he sees self-interest, what am I showing that person? When I pile up anger, guilt, anxiety, am I acting against my self-interest or for my self-interest? Against. So that means it becomes an assimilated value. As long as you think that you are following a value to oblige your parents, oblige a society, oblige a religion, the person it will not take too long for the person to sacrifice that value, because there is an inherent nature, as you very rightly say, to protect self-interest. If I begin to re-understand the whole situation by saying, it seems to me as though I'm a gainer, but actually I'm acting against my self-interest by going against universal values, then you're following the values not to oblige anybody else, but for what? Your own self-interest. That is the only way to make the person follow the values. This is what our teacher used to call showing the person value of value. Why should I follow values? Because if I don't follow the values, I act against my self-interest. Very true. What you're saying is absolutely right. This is why when they define their self-interest in a short term, it may seem as though it is in their interest, and that's why they go against values.
We've had a lot of discussion on this at home recently, because discussing my son trying to, he had to write an essay, and what he was saying is every problem in the world stems from self-interest. So whether it's global warming or wars, somebody wanting power, that it all boils down to self-interest. We've been debating this.
But that would be a distorted view, right? Because
So, actually what he's saying is what Upanishads say. The Upanishads, the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad says, now that you're bringing this, I will talk about it shortly and then we'll stop the class. the Upanishads make a sentence, Atmanastu kamaya sarvam priyam bhavati. Sarvam priyam bhavati, whatever that you like is what? For your own self. Ultimately, human being is programmed also to what? Act in one's own self-interest. This is how it is. Now, does it mean that everybody is selfish? No. So that means the key is, it's true everybody acts in one's own self-interest, but how you define your self-interest shows how mature you are. If I define my self-interest as what? Shopping. Only for you. The whole universe is centered on you, the little you, and everything has to work to satisfy your needs. What kind of human being you would be? Selfish.
Self-centered.
Highly self-centered, highly microscopic. But if you begin to define your self-interest, by helping somebody else, it is still you're acting in your own self-interest. But you have grown so much that by making somebody else happy, it makes you happy. So you're still acting, when you're helping somebody else, you're still acting in your own self-interest, but that self-interest is very different from the other person's self-interest, right? So that means you can't avoid to act in keeping with self-interest. What you can do is change the definition of what makes you happy.
Family, to your neighbors, to your society, your community, your physics,
Like Arjun in the first chapter.
Exactly. Right? So that means you need to expand. And you need to redefine your self-interest. Self-interest in a much bigger context than just your little needs. That is what we call human growth. And that human growth, even in Manisha's class, I asked kids, what makes you happy? One child says, watching TV makes me happy. The next child says, when I do sports, that makes me happy. The third child says, by helping others, it makes me happy. So therefore, they are all doing it for their happiness, but where you derive your happiness from is showing who you are. And this is exactly as Nandini is saying, Duryodhana and Arjuna were exactly in the same situation. How they were interpreting what was self-interest was what? For Duryodhana, what was self-interest?
suppressing the Pandavas and winning over them.
Exactly. And what was Arjuna's self-interest?
Give me what is mine and you have what is yours.
No, at the time of the whole society and the future and the soldiers and his cousins. I mean, it was such a huge, he encompassed everything as his self-interest. Exactly the definition of Mamaka. Who are my people? Right? So that means self-interest is a reality, but that doesn't mean that everybody is self-centered, highly narrow. Right? So Upanishads think way miles ahead. Right? So therefore, this is how that Samanya Dharma is a huge thing, that you are acting against your self-interest. People think that they are acting in their self-interest, that's why they sacrifice dharma. But if you want them to follow dharma, what do you need to show them? That they are acting against their self-interest, because they are piling up things. And with that pile, nobody can be happy. Samanya Dharma, which is what we call universal ethical values. Now, the Upanishads and Gita are so nuanced in the whole analysis that they themselves create a situation and they tell you, even though this dharma is universal, it is not absolute. At times it requires interpretation.
What is right is one thing.
And what is right and what is wrong is not always black and white. There are a lot of gray areas. So in those gray areas you need to assess what is right and what is wrong.
It's like how you told us about the teacher siding with those people who were teaching and even wrongly. It was his dharma to look after, right? The teacher of both the Pandavas and the...
Exactly. So Mahabharata has a lot of stories where you needed to interpret dharma. Wonderful. Tushna is coming up with examples where each one had to make a decision, right? So that I will explain next time. So you think about what she's on the right track. When is it that if you go by this very rigid definition, you go wrong? I think that was the first class where I talked about the tricky situations where you need to go beyond those rigid rules and see the bigger picture. Because in those contexts, you need to interpret dharma. It's not always very clear what is dharma. So we will talk about it in the next class.
That thing what you said, Yudhishthira was getting his family in the mess by just following rigidly dharma.
Excellent, exactly. All these different Bhishma, excellent, right? All these cases, Dronacharya, she gave the example of Dronacharya, she gave the example of Yudhishthir, she gave an example of Bhishma. All failed to interpret dharma correctly. So that means it's complex. It's not as easy as saying, do the right thing, because what is the right thing also sometimes is not very clear. So there is a whole analysis of what is, why, in what circumstances you need to interpret and how do you interpret. So all that we will see next time. Om Purnamadav Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Harihi Om.